Hey y'all, Travis Baldree here. I am the audiobook narrator for Will Wight's spectacular and stupendous Cradle series. And Underlord, Book 6, is coming out in about a week. The audiobook's already done, it's in proofing. In fact, a few minutes ago I got an email from my proofer saying that she was halfway done and should have pickup notes from me by this coming weekend, so that's pretty great. Beyond that, I am not going to talk about Underlord at all. You're just going to have to wait. Further, I promise this time I will not rickroll you. Rickroll somebody 2 times in a row. Who would do that? Nobody would do that. I might do that. But I'm not going to do that. But I might. But I'm not going to. But I might. I'm not going to. Anyway, I'm sorry I don't have a cool hat for you this time. I got this amazing haircut today. I just wanted to show it off. It's so spectacular. You can't tell, but it's purple. It's not really purple. Honestly, I'm just too lazy. I should have gone upstairs and sorted through my children's toy chest and got a hat, but I couldn't be bothered because I'm a big, important narrator and I got better things to do, like make this video. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to talk about character voices. I was on the Cradle fan Reddit earlier, and we were talking a little bit about the decision-making that went into Dross's voice. And I thought it'd be kind of cool to talk about the rest of the characters as well. So that's what we're going to do. Now, I love doing voices for audiobooks. I love it so much. Makes me so happy. A lot of narrators don't do character voices, which is absolutely fine. But you couldn't stop me, probably, even though sometimes you maybe should. Anyway, to be able to work on a series like this that has so many cool characters is just, it's so good. I love it. My normal approach when I'm deciding what to do with a character is to mentally cast them with an actor or actress, like I would for a movie. I think to myself, if I was going to make this movie, who would I want to play this role? And then I try and bear that person in mind while I'm doing the delivery. I don't want to imitate them because that's kind of, but it really does help to have this idea of what some actor might do in a given situation. And it makes it easier for me as I'm reading to rapidly switch between these points of view as the characters are rapid fire, switching up their dialogue. Now, for the first character we're going to talk about, I didn't do that at all. So we're going to start with Weishi Linden. And Weishi Linden is me, but younger. The bass is cut in his voice, and his delivery is a little bit more constrained, a little bit more hesitant than my natural delivery, a little bit slightly more formal. And there were a couple of reasons for this. The first is just his personality, especially when we meet him. He's always apologizing. He's very reticent. And he's always believes that everyone around him knows something that he doesn't. And it's just a voice that I think fits his specific mental place at this point in the story early on. Now, we know he's a big guy, and people are often very intimidated by him. He's boring holes with his glare into them, but that's almost always followed up with him apologizing. So being able to have that audio counterpoint, I think, is important, and I think is useful for the character going forward. But there's a second reason I wanted to start him here, which is that the Cradle series is ostensibly about the advancement and change of Weishi Linden. So I wanted to be able to have somewhere to go. So you'll already, ideally, maybe you haven't, notice that as the books go along, his voice starts to drop out a little bit lower. His pitch introduces a little bit more of that bass, and he starts to get a little bit more direct and a little bit less hesitant in his delivery. He's still got some of that formalism to make sure that you know it's Weishi Linden, but the guy's growing up, effectively. And I wanted to be able to articulate that over the course of the book, so I'm happy that we started where we were so he had a journey to make. All right. Now, the next character we're going to talk about here was easily the most complicated, and that was Yerin. And when we first meet Yerin in Sacred Valley, I believe she's described as having this sort of unplaceable foreign accent. But we didn't want to do an accent that was some obvious location, so we didn't want her to be French or Russian. But it still needed to feel exotic. And at the same time, she needed to sound like a woman of action, because obviously she is. And so I did a few different takes on this. We were just kind of iterating on it, trying to kind of get it zeroed in. And I asked the Hidden Gnome folks if they had an actress that they imagined could embody that spirit. And someone mentioned Gal Gadot, who plays Wonder Woman in the new Wonder Woman films. And I thought that was a spectacular suggestion. So, for Yerin, we're not really taking Gal's accent. Gal is Israeli. But there's parts of that accent that we wanted to incorporate. So it almost sounds a little bit Spanish, but it doesn't have the same musicality. It's a little flatter, and the vowels are broader and held longer, and it doesn't have the same lilt that a Spanish accent generally does. It feels more forceful and solid, which felt appropriate for Yerin. Also, we tried to have it at this sort of middle pitch, because Yerin needs to be able to sound menacing. She needs to be able to sound angry and forceful. And then she also needs to be able to pull it back, because the Cradle series has a lot of humor in it, and she needs to be able to have those lighter deliveries as well. Anyway, Yerin was a lot of fun to do, but she did require a lot of kind of maneuvering to figure out who she was. And whenever Yerin is in a scene, you know it's Yerin. No one else will sound like her throughout all of the series. She has to be very, very unique. Anyway, so moving along, Ethan is kind of next up in the list. And when I was introduced to Ethan in Soulsmith, I kind of knew right away who I would cast in the movie, and that would be Tom Hiddleston, specifically his take on Loki from the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies and Thor. He's just got this wonderful, charming approach, which at the same time hints that there is probably something else going on. There's a little bit of mischief to it. There's an untrustworthiness that's still charming. And that's what I wanted for Ethan. And I think that's borne out well over the course of the books. And it did present a challenge as we move on and we approach Dross, but I'm still happy with where we ended up for Ethan. Anyway, next up is my favorite character to voice in the series. Easily. Possibly my favorite character in the series. And that's Porthos. Porthos is my spirit animal. Big, black, flaming turtle. He's the most fun to voice. He's also kind of the most taxing to voice, which is not super surprising since he's a giant black turtle who's on fire. But, and I was thinking back a little bit to The Never-Ending Story and the big turtle in The Never-Ending Story. And I didn't want to go that slow and ponderous, but it was kind of in the back of my mind. But
Porthos is low and gravelly, but because he has been alive for so long, his voice has a certain regal quality, and he bites off his words. And of course, he is a dragon. And he always says that word the same way. Dragon. Anyway, I love Porthos to pieces. So good. Next up, we should talk about Mercy. Mercy is probably the most straightforward in a lot of ways, because she doesn't have a specific accent. In fact, nobody in the Akura clan has a kind of a specific accent. I've tried to partition the clans as we encounter them so that they have kind of a general accent vibe to help keep them separate. But when I was thinking about Mercy, I was imagining Jewel State from Firefly with a little less, country twang to it. And in general, what I wanted was that optimism, that sort of bright, bubbly optimism in the face of everything. And to me, Kaylee in the Firefly series sort of embodied a lot of that. And I don't really want to sound anything like Kaylee specifically. It's just having Jewel State in mind when doing Mercy makes it so much easier to do. Mercy.
Next up, Jai Daisho. So Jai Daisho in my mind was George Takei. And again, I don't want to ape George Takei because he has a very specific voice. But what I did want to do is bring in some of the deep regalness that George Takei has. Oh my. You have to kind of hold your neck tense when you do this and broaden out your mouth. Oh my. So Jai Daisho, George Takei.
And then I think we'll wrap up here on Dross. And as I mentioned earlier, having Ethan be kind of this Tom Hiddleston vibe complicated the decision-making for Dross, because a lot of people hear Dross as Stephen Merchant, who played Wheatley in the Portal 2. And he's got this kind of bubbly, British, quippy vibe. And it's not at all the same as Tom Hiddleston, because it's a very different UK accent, but it's still British, kind of quintessentially British. It does have a different pacing, but whenever I tried having them near each other, especially given the fact that they both have a lot of humor in their dialogue, it felt like they were button heads. And I really want all these characters to be as unique individually as I can make them, so that they have huge contrasts one to the other, that I can invest with as much character as I can. The other part that went into it was the fact that Dross is kind of a baby presence. He's like a sort of mini presence.
So, for the other presences, there was a certain robotic delivery.
For instance, Serial's presence
Also was a female robotic delivery.
So I wanted a tiny hint of that, but Dross obviously has a lot more life to him, and he's a comic foil sort of throughout. So
Dross is a little bit brasher than all of the other presences. He has a slight amount of that mechanical delivery, but there's a lot more elasticity to the way that he delivers, because he has to be able to hit his comic timing. Anyway,
that's how we arrived at where Dross eventually ended up. For a while, I also experimented with sort of a Ryan Reynolds Deadpool kind of delivery, but it just felt too human. And Dross is special, and having that presence connection and pushing that brashness, again, because there's no other character like that in kind of like the main set, worked well with his humor and the fact that he's almost always kind of like butting in and interjecting into someone else's thoughts. There's a sort of a forcefulness to that. It's what I felt worked. So there's kind of an overview of a lot of the mains from the Cradle series. I sure love doing this series. I love it to pieces. Everybody should read it. Everybody should have copies on their mantelpiece. They should talk about it at parties. Anyway, thanks a ton for reading, for listening. I hope you enjoy Underlord, and I'll see you there.